All right. Hello. Hello, and welcome to episode 519 of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. My name is Seth Paridon, historian and deputy director of the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum. With me, as always, is my good buddy, co-host, and fantabulous, that's a good word, author and historian, Jon Parshall. How are you, Jon?
I'm hanging in there. I am deep in the weeds in laying out a book. And
Mm.
so, anybody who's ever done page design and that kind of stuff, it just comes down to all little fiddly bits. It's like, why aren't the page numbers between this chapter and that chapter auto updating? And it's just, yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm birthing a book. So
How many pages are we up to?
I don't know because I'm still in the very early stuff, but I can
Ah,
tell you that like the first chapter that covers the beginning of the war before I even start talking is 73 pages long. So this thing is going to be 1,000 pages.
that's a beast. That is
It's
a
a
beast. But
beast of a book. Yeah,
can't wait to see it. Can't wait to see it. And I know a lot of our
hold that
listeners
thought.
slash watchers, Jesus, I can't talk today, feel the same way. So bear with me, gang, as I continue to stumble over my own tongue. So it's just
Excellent.
one of those mornings. All right.
Yeah.
So, well, let's get to it. So if you remember last week, actually, technically the
Two
first
weeks.
2 weeks, we talked about the first wave. Oh, wait, before I get into
Yes.
this, I almost forgot what the heck I was going to do.
Yep.
Guys, it is Q&A time. It is Q&A time. And the day that this episode airs, which is September 9th, 2025, we are going to start taking questions for our Q&A session. We don't know when that session will be. It will probably be middle to late October, but regardless, please send your questions, and I'll put the email address here to unauthorized Pacific Podcast at gmail.com. And I'll put the bar down at the bottom of the screen here so you can't miss it. Here's the deal. Taking questions from September 9th through the 26th, which is a Friday. Anything after the 26th of September, we're not going to look at because Sean is going to be with us again, and he's going to have to wade through all this stuff.
And I'll
Please,
be in Japan.
and Jon will be in Japan. So please, in the subject title of your email, just put Q&A. Q&A from Ted, whatever. I don't care. But just put Q&A so when Sean sees that, he knows immediately what it is. And again, as always, please keep your questions as short and as concise as possible so we can actually fit them into the show and we can hopefully answer your questions. Right or wrong, at least we'll give it a shot.
Right. We make no guarantees.
Yeah.
I was also going to put in a plug too that on October the 23rd, I will be down at the Audie Murphy chapter of the World War II History Roundtable in Greenville, Texas, which
Mhm.
is a little north of Dallas. And I will be doing a talk down there on the dropping of the atomic bombs. And some people have probably seen most of what I do when I do that, here on this channel. But in any case, I will be there on October the 23rd. And if anybody wants to come out for that talk at the Audie Murphy Museum, that is where I will be that evening at about 7. So there you go.
Mhm. I
All
was
right.
out there a few months ago.
You
Those are
were.
good people.
Yeah, you had a good time, apparently. I'm looking forward
I
to it
did.
as well.
I did. They're good folks.
Yeah.
Good folks. All right. So again, back to what I'd initially said. The last 2 weeks we did the first wave of Pearl Harbor. We talked so damn long we had to split it into two. Uh, but they're good. They're
Par for the
hot.
course.
But this week we're going to wrap it up. We're going to talk about the second wave. So with that, let's get into it. So the airplanes of the first wave wing their way over the horizon. Destruction spread across their path behind them. Never in the history of warfare had an enemy force flown their way into a major military installation such as Oahu and wreaked such havoc in such a short amount of time. For about 45 minutes, Japanese aircraft had devastated the naval anchorage and surrounding airfields, attacking simultaneously or within minutes of each other Wheeler, Hickam, Ford Island, Kaneohe, and Eva Mooring Mast. The first wave of aircraft knocked out Oahu's defensive capability in terms of fighter aircraft, raking Wheeler Field from end to end, destroying P-40s, P-36s, all tightly knotted together on the tarmac. Hickam was equally pounded. The bomber base's facilities had been obliterated, as had the rows of Park B-17s, B-18s, and whatever else lay out in the open. Kaneohe and Ford Island had been rendered blind. The long-legged PBY Catalina search aircraft had been bombed and strafed and rendered the American search response, for the most part, impotent. And while the destruction of American air power was nearly absolute, it paled in comparison to what had happened in the anchorage. In the now oil-filled waters of Pearl Harbor, the United States Pacific Fleet, her battleships anyway, lay smoking and sinking. Arizona was destroyed, as was the overturned Oklahoma and the sunken West Virginia and California. Tennessee and Maryland, both damaged but not severely, were hemmed in by their sunken sisters. Cruisers had been hit. Destroyers had been hit. Fires were burning on ships across the harbor, and men were desperately trying to make their way to safety through oily, fiery water. More than 1,600 Americans, to the best of our guess, sailors and Marines were dead or dying on Arizona and Oklahoma alone. Hundreds more were spread across the other ships in port. The Pacific Fleet had been crippled beyond comprehension, and as the first wave of Japanese attackers sped off, many felt that the attack was over. However, just 15 to 20 minutes later, the second wave appeared on the horizon. The attack was far from over, but unlike the first wave, who pounced upon an unsuspecting American military at 0755, the second wave drove into a hornet's nest. As the second wave made their way into Oahu airspace, the skies around them, specifically over the anchorage, erupted in AAA fire. The second wave would not find the going as easy as their first wave brothers. That is not an exaggeration because we'll
True.
show some pictures. I mean, it's sky's black.
Yeah, yeah, that's how we roll. And it points out too that, even here at the dawn of this war, 1941, American AAA is already arguably the best in the world. The 5-inch 25 is a good gun to start with. The 5-inch 38 is the best heavy flak gun in the world. I'm sorry, with all due respect to those fans of the Wehrmacht that do like the 128 millimeter German model. The 5-inch 38's got a better rate of fire, and eventually, of course, we're going to have a VT fuse to go with that puppy. We didn't have that in 1941, but the material point is that when this second wave of attackers come in over Pearl Harbor, they are greeted with a large amount of both 5-inch fire and a lot of light automatic stuff as well. A lot of 50 caliber, some Orlikins as well. But yeah, there's a lot of lead in the air real quick.
And that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. If you look at the AAA suite on like Nevada, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, she's loaded down with her 5 inchers, and for the most part, they're casemate guns, and some of them are anti-aircraft, elevated weapons and things like that, as we know.
Yeah, single
But they're
single mounts, open mounts, and then a lot of 50s.
right, and that's the thing is it's the 50s. There weren't 20 millimeters on Nevada, to my knowledge. There were obviously later, but not now.
Yep,
There were no 40 millimeters. There were a
correct.
few 1.1s. I think Nevada had, if I remember correctly, two or four 1.1 mounts on them, and that was it.
Yep.
And I mean, the amount of lead that is put in the air over Pearl Harbor, and again, I'll show the picture here. It's a famous picture. It's just the sky is black with AAA fire. It's it's a testament to just what we could do in 1941, and then
Was
flip that to
nuts.
1945, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But anyway, so John, the second wave comes in at 0854 thereabouts, within a minute or two of that, and it's not as large as the first wave, but it's a hefty
Yeah.
tote.
Yeah, it's 167 aircraft as opposed to 183 from the first wave, and I don't know how that breaks down with the various mechanical aborts and whatnot. It's about 15 planes less, but nevertheless, in this strike package too, you're going to see about a 50-50 split between the aircraft that are going to be going after the anchorage and the aircraft that are going to be involved in airfield suppression and air supremacy roles. So we've got a group of 54 Kates that are rolling in. These are from the carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku. 27 of them are going to be going after both Ford Island and Kaneohe. So 9 aircraft to Ford, 18 are going to go up to Kaneohe, and those are from Shokaku. And then an additional 27 Kates are going to be going to Ford Island and Hickam, and those are from Zuikaku. We've got a group of 78 VALs that are all going after the anchorage. And these are all the aircraft from Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. In other words, the 4 carriers that all brought in their torpedo planes in the initial attack now are coming in with their dive bomber contingent. And then we've also got 35 Zeros that are from Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu as well. Each of them, they're about 9 apiece that are going to be hitting Hickam, Ford, Kaneohe, and Bellows Field. And so they're going to be all over the island. In terms of the commanders for this particular strike, the top banana is Lieutenant Commander Shimazaki Shigekazu, who is the air group leader from Zuikaku, and he is going to be heading over to Hickam, and this guy is going to actually live through the majority of the war, but he will be killed off Taiwan in 1945, intriguingly enough. The dive bombers are under the command of the famous Lieutenant Commander Egusa Takashige, who is widely acclaimed as the best dive bomber pilot in the entire Navy. He's going to be killed at Phil C. Our buddies Abe Zenji
Mhm.
is going to be, he is on Akagi at this point in time. He's going to be in that group, and he's in charge of a Chutai of 9 aircraft. And then let's see, the fighters are under Akagi's Lieutenant Shindo Saburo, who will be heading over to Hickam Field, and he actually is going to live through the war. The other guy to keep an eye on is Aida Fusata from Soryu. He is the commander of the Soryu fighter group, and he is going to be going up to Kaneohe, and we'll be talking about him a little later on. So there you have it.
We'll get into this more in detail as we the second wave develops, but uh, it's no secret that I mean the cream of the crop was Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, Soryu, and
Yep,
that's why these guys are assigned the targets in the anchorage, and the other
yep,
cats are assigned the
that's right.
stationary, if you will, land
Yep.
targets. I mean, there's a reason for all that, though, right?
Yeah, Shokaku and Zuikaku are the newest carriers in the fleet, and their air groups are generally accorded not being as good as carrier divisions 1 and 2.
Mhm.
Carrier Division 2, Hiryu and Soryu are generally given top banana status of the carrier divisions. Although I have to say that, if you look at, the torpedo bombers on Akagi, for instance, Murata Shigeharu, that guy's the best torpedo plane pilot in the Navy. So these are both very good carrier divisions. But yeah, the more experienced foursome, they are given the targets in the anchorage, whereas Shokaku and Zuikaku's birds are mostly relegated to pounding airfields.
All right, so something we didn't really talk about last 2 weeks was
Yeah,
Battleship Nevada, and it's an interesting whole thing that goes on with Nevada, and and I know the questions are always going to arise. Why didn't more ships get out of the harbor? And we addressed that last week or week before, whatever, which one it was. I forgot where I cut the episode in half.
right.
But it takes a long time to raise steam. And Nevada, of course, is one of those ships that was able to get out of harbor and probably the most famous because of that.
Yep.
Um, and her process of this going on started around 6 o'clock that morning. About 6 o'clock that morning, her OOD was a gentleman named Ensign Joseph Tausig Jr. He's the son of Admiral Joseph Tausig.
Mm,
He had ordered an additional boiler to be lit off on Nevada, and the reason for that was nothing, they weren't going to go out on a joy cruise or anything like that. They were doing a power transfer. In other words, one boiler had been rolling for, I don't remember how many hours, but several hours. And Tausig was like, hey, you know what? Let's switch it to this other boiler. So let's get steam worked up so we can get this thing over and transfer power and give this other one a rest. So by the time the attack is unfolding, Nevada's got steam raised up in her boilers for movement. She's actually ready
yeah.
to go, just barely, but enough to where she can get moving. Um, when the attack does start, Tausig, who is OOD, immediately runs to his battle station. He's is a pretty interesting story too. He's a gunnery officer actually,
Mm,
and he's in charge of the starboard side AAA battery. So and that's everything. That's everything from the 50 calibers to the 5 inchers to the whole
right.
shoot
The whole
match.
schmack.
Yeah, no pun intended.
I was
That's
just
his
looking him
thing.
up. He's a graduate of the Annapolis class of 1941. So he's
Mm,
not a subject of Craig Simon's recent book, but he's the class right after it. So this guy is just brand spanking new. He's just
fresh.
graduated, yeah, 5 months previous. So anyway,
Yeah,
6 months.
he's as green as grass.
Yeah.
But again, this goes, something that we talked about when we had Craig on. It goes to it proves that, the proof is in the pudding that these people were well trained,
Yeah,
even though they were green as grass, they knew what they had to do. And the same thing for Taussig Jr. here is, when the defecation hits the ventilation, he knows exactly where he's got to go and exactly what he's got to do, and he does not hesitate.
yeah,
He immediately goes to his battle station, and I'm going to read a quote from him. He recalled, quote, "Immediately, I left the quarterdeck and climbed the 6 ladders to my battle station in the starboard anti-aircraft director. As an individual, then, my view was restricted to what was going on in my immediate vicinity." This goes to what we were talking about oral histories, John. You
yeah,
can
right.
see all you see is
So does
what's
Rob.
right here. Yeah.
Yep.
He says, "I was conscious of the fact that before I reached my battle station, the starboard anti-aircraft battery was firing." I bet it was.
Yeah.
And, and that someone had pulled the safety firing cutouts, which normally restricted the firing elevations of the guns to 65 degrees. As I climbed through the door to the director, I was conscious that the crosshairs on my check sight were on an airplane, and I saw that it was hit almost immediately and went down trailing smoke. The director was slewing around for another target when I was hit by a missile, and not a missile, but something that flew through,
Shrapnel or
which,
some.
yeah, big hunk of steel, which passed completely through my thigh and through the case of the ballistic computer on the director, which was directly in front of me. There was no pain, and because I was clutching the sides of the hatch as the director slewed around, I did not fall down. My left foot was grotesquely under my left armpit. Yeah, Jesus God. But in a
Right.
detachment of shock, I was not
Yeah.
aware that this was particularly bad. Yeah,
Don't
hey
try
man.
this at home.
No, that's
Right.
when you are in the moment right there, brother.
Yes.
They carried me into the sky control structure between the two AA directors and laid me out on the deck. Eventually, a hospital corpsman arrived with a basket stretcher, administered a shot of morphine, and got me into the stretcher. The rest of the morning was spent observing, his quotes, not mine, the Battle of Pearl Harbor through the eyes of the enlisted personnel who remained with me.
Mm.
The interesting thing about Tausig is that, and I mean, if I remember correctly, he lost the lower portion of his leg later because I mean, this whatever this was that hit him, like when I mean,
Yeah.
right through him and massive compound fracture. And
Yeah.
it was bad. He remained like in his post. He remained in the director or very near the director at the very least, and did conduct his duty.
Yeah.
Even though laying there, high as a Japanese kite from morphine, he's sitting there conducting his duty. He's going to be
They
awarded the Navy Cross. Go ahead.
yeah, they did amputate his leg.
I thought so.
And
Yeah.
he was back in action 3 days after that, apparently.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I saw that same, and I'm like 3 days after an
That
amputation.
seems unlikely to me,
Maybe
but
3 weeks after,
it's
or
yeah.
but I don't think 3 days.
Anywho, yeah, he
Yeah,
lost he lost his leg.
yeah. So while his combat action, as I put in the notes, is or notable for sure, because like I said, he receives a Navy Cross for, despite his severe wounds, not abandoning his post. His decision to light that second boiler pays
Yes,
dividends to a degree in the immediate future. So as the attack first takes off, Nevada takes a torpedo,
yes,
not unlike the rest of the ships on Battleship Row. And
yeah,
it's a big kaboom on Nevada.
yeah. And she's at the extreme end. She is
Yes.
behind Arizona, and so as you can imagine, if you're a Japanese torpedo pilot boring in down the southeast lock, lo and behold, the ships that were directly in front of that alleyway, in other words, West Virginia and Oklahoma, just got clobbered. And of course, there's a standard deviation that goes out, depending on where the ends of Battleship Row are. And Nevada, being on the far end, only gets one fish.
Yeah.
But it hits her port bow and makes a pretty big hole there, a 48-foot long gash in her torpedo blister. Did not penetrate the inner armor, but what ends up happening is it blows open some of the seams and she begins slowly flooding. It is not dramatic at this point. Um, but the truth of the matter is that from the time she took that hit, she was slowly sinking, and they were not able to keep up with that flooding.
Yeah. She's her the senior officer that was present at that time was a gentleman named Lieutenant Commander Francis Thomas. And Thomas immediately orders counterflooding at that point,
Mm-hmm.
immediately, which is the correct thing to do, obviously. And as I put in the notes, watertight doors were closed, but Nevada was old, and I mean technically by a month, She was the oldest battleship, not counting Utah, the oldest battleship in Pearl Harbor. Oklahoma was the next oldest, I guess, if you want to say that.
Yeah.
And she did have she's old. I mean, you know, as you get old, things don't work like they used to. And
Right.
this is kind of the same thing here. And her watertight integrity was compromised not only by the, as you said, the concussion and the blast that sprung to some seams in there, but her watertight doors weren't exactly watertight.
Yeah.
And some people have said, and some historians have said that, you know, she was improperly maintained and all this other jazz, and that's why she was springing leaks. That's not the truth. She had gone under a complete overhaul, just I want to say like a year or 14 months before Pearl Harbor. So she was indeed maintained. She was just an old vessel, and she you could make the argument that, you know, when we talked about FDR, you know, having the ability to basically just scrap ships and build new ones, that Nevada may have been on that list coming soon had the attack
Yeah.
not unfolded as it did, and we needed every ship we could get. So,
Well, and we see the same thing happening with older ships of, more like a World War One vintage. Their anti-torpedo systems just are not as deep and sophisticated as more modern combatants. And so you see the same thing happening at uh, like the HMS Repulse. When she is finally hit by aerial torpedoes from Japanese aircraft, she goes down like right now. Just her side systems are just not built to take that kind of punishment. It just obliterates her. Guts are like a fish, and down she goes. So Nevada is within her rights to say, yeah, I'm kind of an old lady at this point, and getting hit by one of these torpedoes is a little bit more than my side protection can really cope with.
and
So,
that is exactly what happened. So,
yeah,
as she's sitting there at the tail end of Battleship Row, and Arizona goes kaboom,
kaboom.
all the oil and it's not just from Arizona, but it's mostly is because Arizona was directly
Yep.
in front of Nevada. All the flaming oil and all this other stuff starts drifting back towards Nevada. And as this happens, you know, it becomes abundantly clear that we may catch fire. So
Yeah,
we
we
need to
don't
get
want to
the
be
hell
here.
out of here. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, this is not where we want to be. So the whole issue of lighting off her second boiler allows her to be able to move. And SOPA, senior officer present afloat, Admiral Furlong, we talked about him in the first episode. He orders, as we know, all ships sortie
Right.
as soon as the attack starts. Well, Nevada does that very thing at 0840. She starts backing away from what is left of Arizona and starts to move out. But before she does that, and this is friggin' cool, Chief Bosun's mate Edwin J. Hill, and we're going to hear from him again in a little while. He dives right off of her stern, swims over to the mooring quay that's still there in Pearl Harbor today, and starts untying this thing and flinging the lines back as best he can because these lines are about yay big
Yeah,
around.
they're big. Right.
Yeah, he's flinging them back in the water and swims back to Nevada and climbs up one of these lines and gets back aboard the ship with his line handling detail. And there's multiple stories of heroism on Nevada, and we're going to highlight a couple. And another one is a gentleman named Warrant Officer Donald K. Ross. He started the actions to raise the steam necessary to move the battleship on Tausig's orders earlier. Once this is accomplished, Lieutenant Commander Francis Thomas, the man we talked about just a minute ago, who was the damage control officer, senior officer at the bridge at that moment, assumed command from the bridge. Chief Quartermaster Bob Sedberry then made his way to the bridge, where he was ordered by Lieutenant L.E. Ruff, the ship's navigator, to con the ship because there was no one else there to do it, as
Hmm.
he, Ruff, navigated down the channel and theoretically the open sea. So Nevada backs away slowly astern, then she starts moving forward at about one-third speed.
Yeah,
Um,
'cause she's only got two boilers up. I mean, she's
right.
not going much faster than that. Just,
No.
yeah, no can do. So
And you really don't want a battleship going 20 knots through Pearl
not
Harbor.
not in an arbor. Yeah, right. Yeah, dead slow is the order of the day.
That is a
So
recipe for disaster.
yeah,
So, and you know, and one of the more I don't want to, it's not a myth, but it's an inspiring thing is, you know, when she does start doing this amidst the carnage,
yes,
she starts moving down Battleship Row, right, you know, abreast of West Virginia
Arizona and
and
everything. Yeah,
all that. And the guys that are aboard these ships, they see her, and of course, they instantly think, "Oh, she's going out there to go fight." And everybody starts, hooting and hollering, and sirens blasting, and whistles blowing, and all this other stuff. It is really a very, very, very inspirational moment in time. And of course, it's not what Nevada was doing, but the guys didn't know that, and it just, it is an inspiring moment. So as she is moving down the channel or trying to get to the channel, this is when the second wave comes
Yes.
in, and
Yeah, because
these
she
are Goose's people, right?
that's right. And so yeah, she started backing away about 15 minutes before the second wave rolls in over the harbor, and now all of a sudden you've got 78 dive bombers overhead. Um, and yeah, there's a question here. Why did the Japanese dive bombers end up going after her? And really what you see is that there is a complete breakdown of positive command and control over the Japanese dive bombers at this point, and they end up over focusing on Nevada. There's a number of things happening here, though, from the Japanese perspective. First of all, this harbor is now covered with oily smoke from ships like the Arizona and the fires on the airfields. There's also just cloud cover that has kind of rolled in the intervening couple hours since the first wave attack came rolling in. There's a ton of anti-aircraft fire over the harbor, as you can see in those images, just black with that stuff. And now you've got this big juicy target in Nevada that is moving down this channel, and she just draws dive bombers like a magnet. Um, which is not a good thing because from a weapon target standpoint, a dive bomber is not an effective weapon against a battleship. A
No.
250 kilogram semi-armor piercing bomb, a common bomb as the Japanese would call them, is not capable of getting through the deck armor of a battleship, even an old ship like Nevada. And so going after Nevada with dive bombers is just a complete waste of time. Yeah, you may be able to do some damage to her superstructure, but you're not going to sink this ship. And there are many, many other juicy targets in this harbor, and we're going to talk about. But really, what ends up sort of happening is that the dive bomber attack devolves. Instead of being a coordinated enterprise, it really comes down into small groups of Japanese dive bombers, one or two at a time, kind of looking down through the broken cloud cover, trying to figure out what the hell can I hit, and peeling off and going after various targets of opportunity. But the one exception is Nevada, and all of Kaga, essentially all of Kaga's 27 plane contingent of dive bombers, they all go after her.
Mm.
So
Very reminiscent of all of basically all of Enterprise going after Kaga
yeah,
at
same
Midway.
deal.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, same kind of thing. Do we know? I mean, the cloud cover, you mentioned that, and then you can see it in the imagery. The cloud cover from the morning to, well, the early morning to mid morning, I guess you could say, is significantly different, and it
Yep.
is heavier, and it was broken cloud cover, but it was pretty damn heavy over the anchorage. That
Yeah.
had to have screwed up these guys' dives
Oh,
too.
totally. Completely.
Yeah.
Standard doctrine for these dudes, and they do not dive as steeply as American dive bombers. They typically come in at 65 to 70 degrees. That's
Mhm.
a typical Japanese val sort of run. But you still need, 8 to 10,000
Easy.
vertical feet worth of ramp space to do your thing here. And the cloud cover was down, I forget exactly where, but 2, 3 thousand feet. So there's not a lot of room to get these dives in. And so, yeah, the whole thing is a mess from a dive bomber perspective.
Yeah. So Nevada eventually claims, Tausig's starboard AAA batteries just, and
Doing
remember
their
that
thing.
grainy footage that we were
Yeah,
looking
we've
at?
seen
You
footage of
see,
them blazing away.
yeah,
Yeah,
and she is lighting in it. That is her starboard side. Not that her port side didn't fire, but that was her starboard side that we see in that footage. That she is just, I mean, just muzzle flashes all over God's creation. They claim 5 aircraft shot
no
down.
way.
I don't believe they may have gotten a piece of one or two. I'm sure they
Right.
did,
I mean, the
but
Japanese do lose a fair number of dive bombers in this attack. They end up losing 18 dive bombers from the second wave. I believe it's in the end notes. But
Mm,
and a lot of them, obviously, they're all over the anchorage, and so that's where they were shot down. Did
yeah,
Nevada get 5 of those 18? I doubt it.
yeah,
Just given the sheer number of warships that were in the harbor at this time, because everybody is blazing away with
yeah.
everything they've got. So yeah,
Every mother's son is shooting everything they
yeah,
can lay
buddy.
their hands on.
Yep.
So she collects at least 5 bomb hits, John. I've read that maybe as many as 10, but I don't think she took
I
10
do not
bombs.
buy that for a minute. Both Alan Zim and Mark Stilley, and by the way, we should put in a plug here for Mark. Mark Stilley has a new book on Pearl Harbor that is going to be coming out, I believe, from Osprey, and then in the not too distant future. And anybody who's into the Japanese Navy knows that Mark has done just a ton of very good work in that space. And so, yeah, he's coming out with a new book on Pearl Harbor, and I reviewed it, and it's quite good. Um, anyway, both Zim and Stilley say 5 hit, and I buy that because given the average accuracy of the dive bombers during this attack as a whole, there's no way in hell they collected 10. It's just not in the cards. So
10 bomb hits on a battleship that old would do some
yeah, yeah, mess up the
semi-army piercing
superstructure
or not, that would do some significant damage to her upper works, and that
for sure.
damage just frankly isn't there,
Yeah.
in the post battle analysis. All right, so
Yep.
down in her bowels, the gentleman that we named before, Donald K. Ross, his station, his battle station, is in the dynamo room. Now she is taking hits from bombs. She is a fire. That smoke
Hmm.
is filling the inside of the ship. It's filling his station particularly. Um, the only thing he knew, down in the bowels of the ship, and that's, what's different about U.S. Navy than, say, the infantry is that you're in the bow of a ship. You might feel it shaking, you might hear a boom, but you don't know what the hell's going on. All he
Right.
knows is that smoke is coming in, and he's trying to get this damn ship to keep steam up and keep moving. He winds up passing out from the smoke at least, let's see, one, two, 3 times and
Wow.
being dragged out of the station. He's resuscitated, or he just, he breathes fresh air and then goes back in, and
Wow.
over and over and over and over again to keep Nevada running, because
Hmm.
his orders are keep steam up and let's get this damn thing out of the
Yeah.
harbor. He doesn't know what's going on outside of that. And he does this action 2 or 3 times at least that we know of, and passes out. And he does survive, and he accordingly is awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions to keep Nevada moving. Um,
Hmm.
as she's moving down the harbor towards the channel, she passes Admiral Furlong, who gave the order for all ships to sortie.
And
He
now he's like,
orders
actually, no,
yeah, all ships but you.
but you.
He sends her. He orders a signal light to flash. Quote, do not attempt to, all in caps, by the way, do not attempt to exit the harbor. Proceed to Middle Lock, North Ford Island, and drop anchor. And this is specifically directed to Battleship Nevada. On her bridge, Lieutenant Commander Thomas, he noted the flash signal and began to comply, ordering
Hmm.
Ruff and Sedberry, who's driving the boat, to drive the ships toward Waipio Peninsula and drop anchor there.
Yeah,
But as he's moving towards that area, he's realizing pretty quick that he's probably not going to make it that far.
we're sinking. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And there's been a long-standing myth around, oh my God, if Nevada had sunk in the channel would be blocked for months and blah 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 blah. Zim did a pretty good job of dispelling that, I think, in that he notes that the width of the channel is several hundred yards, and that even if Nevada were turned, a thwart to that, she still can't block the entire channel. Would it have been an annoyance? Yeah, for sure. But there was no way that the Japanese were going to somehow, put the put the plug in the bottle here and keep the entire fleet locked in. That was just not in the cards. But nevertheless, from the standpoint of Nevada, yeah, we're going down, and we do not want to be sunk in the middle of the channel. That would be a bad thing. And
Indeed.
so what they end up doing is beaching her next to Hospital Point, and yeah, that's pretty much the end of her movement.
Yeah. Sedberry's the guy that drives her up onto the no up onto the bank there and just kind of nudges her in there. Before he does that too, and I neglected to say this, the gentleman we talked about before, Chief Water Tender Edwin Hill,
Mm.
He's the guy that dove off of the stern and untied the ship and so she could get moving. He's
Yeah,
up forward and he is issued orders to prepare to drop the anchor. And if anybody's ever seen how they do that, they kick out the kingpin and down the anchor goes. He's
yeah,
up forward getting ready to do that very thing when Nevada takes a bomb. It blows him overboard and it winds up killing him. He also, for the actions of diving off and untying the ship and then getting up there and dropping the anchor amidst gunfire and bomb blasts, he also is awarded the Medal of Honor.
right.
So when she gets up there and she nudges into the sand there, a tug does come later on that afternoon and like shoves her big ass all the way up against
I
the,
think yeah, that's right.
yeah, because she's kind of hanging out there in the
Right.
middle of everything. So we talked about it last couple of weeks, and we neglected on purpose to skip it until now, and that's we're going to talk about Mervyn Binion. There's a lot of information here about Binion, and we don't necessarily need to go through it all, but there's a whole process.
Hmm.
And what
Captain
happens to
of
him, of
West
course.
Virginia. Yep.
Yeah, and then of course Doris Miller, and we'll talk about Dory here in just a minute too. So Binion is wounded mortally, and we talked about that by shrapnel or
To his
God
gut.
no, yeah, and it just eviscerates him. It disembowels him right there, but he's still alive,
Yeah.
which is terrifying. The ship's communication officer, Lieutenant Commander Johnson, recruited at that point after Binion hits the deck and literally just slumps there. He recruits mess attendant Doris Miller, who Doris Miller, Dory is his name, was. If you've seen pictures of him, and I know we
It's
all
a big
have,
man.
big old boy, like
Yeah. Big
big
guy.
dude, well over 6 feet tall, like 240,
Line
250.
yeah, linebacker or linebacker plus. I mean,
Yeah,
he's a big man.
he was a big boy. He recruited Miller to physically pick up Binion and remove him because
Yep.
Johnson could not, but
Yeah.
Dory Miller most certainly could.
Yep.
He recalled, and I quote, he says, "I proceeded to the signal bridge where I found Captain Binion laying on a cot in full uniform, wounded. I brought Doris Miller with me, a very powerfully built individual, having in mind that he might pick the captain up and carry him below. Lieutenant Ricketts was also on the signal bridge at this time and was concerned with getting the captain below. Captain was carried on the cot to the top of the ladder leading down from the signal bridge. The cot sagged and almost broke. He was returned to the first position where I saw him. Both moves were very painful, and he requested that he be left where he was.
Yeah, I
There
can
are, of
believe
course,
that.
no facilities for getting a wounded man down from the signal bridge level, and the captain was very seriously wounded. I returned to the forecastle and reported to Lieutenant Commander Beatty that it was advisable to leave the captain where he was. And when I mean disemboweled, I mean disemboweled. I mean, it
Yeah.
went
There's
clear
nothing.
through his lowers and just,
Yeah. He was
yeah,
not going to make it through this no matter where they brought him down. But yeah, in any case,
no. So Dory Miller, there's not a
he's
whole hell of a lot he can do for him.
right.
And he's kind of standing there like,
Right.
what now?
Yeah. My apportioned role has not been fulfilled because I just can't move this guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because he eventually is ordered to, leave him alone. Don't touch him. Just let him be.
Die.
Let him be.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, the story about Dory Miller is, he famously, spontaneously jumped on a 50 caliber machine gun and started shooting down Japanese planes. That's not actually true. I mean, he does do that, but he's ordered to do that. He's
Hmm.
ordered by Lieutenant White to, because, all this is going on West Virginia, and there's a couple of open 50 mounts here, and he looks around, he sees a man who's breathing, and he goes, "You get over there and operate that weapon."
Yeah.
And the story is that White had ordered him to feed the weapon, to
Mm.
feed the 50 caliber machine gun. But when Miller gets over there, he looks around for somebody to shoot the gun. There's nobody to shoot the gun. And he goes, "Well, the hell with it." And he does
Yeah.
get on there and he does start operating that weapon. Um, Again, it's like Nevada. Nevada shoots down 5 airplanes. They say Dory Miller shot down 2 to 3. Who knows? Did he? God knows. Probably
Doesn't matter.
not. But it
Probably
doesn't
not.
matter. No, but it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. He receives the Navy Cross, of course, for his actions. And unfortunately, and again, we talked about the movie Pearl Harbor. You got to watch it, man. You got
No,
to.
I don't.
I want you. Yeah, you do. You need to watch it with a couple drinks in you, and then call me when you're done, because I'd love to hear what you got to say. But movies like that, perpetuate the myth that he got the Navy Cross for doing that, for jumping on a 50 caliber and operating a weapon when it was
Right.
a missile, and then he wasn't trained to do that. But I mean, all you got to do is grab it and squeeze a trigger and it goes. I mean, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to fire an automatic weapon. What
Yeah.
he did get the Navy Cross for, what his citation reads, is for saving lives. And
Hmm.
because of his sheer
His
size,
size,
yeah,
his
it's a
strength. Yeah.
big dude. He was
Yeah.
able physically to pick people up and move them. And
Yeah.
that's what he did. He wandered the deck. I say wandered, but he walked around the deck of West Virginia looking for anybody who needed help. And if they couldn't move on their own, he would physically pick them up and move them, I think, to the quarterdeck. Yeah, he'd move them to the quarterdeck
Yeah.
where they could be tended to or expire on their own, out of the way of the smoke and the fire.
Yeah.
And estimates range again, kind of like him shooting down airplanes, that he saved between 10 or 20 men or 30 or five. Nobody knows. But what he did do was most certainly save lives. His actions, absolutely, without question, saved many
Multiple
men's
lives.
lives.
Yeah.
And he is the first African American in World War II to be awarded the Navy Cross
Yeah.
for his actions, and he won't be the last. But it's frankly it's kind of sad that he was the first. But uh, but yeah, his actions need to be understood for what they were. They weren't for shooting down Japanese airplanes. It was for saving lives, and I think that's
Yep.
incredible.
Yep.
So, John, let's talk about Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania
Tennessee.
is important. She she kind of escapes really. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. She kind of does. She's the flagship of the fleet, actually, despite
Mhm.
her age, and she is in the dry dock at this point with two other destroyers, Cassin and Downs. That are so got three ships in a dry dock. She's up on blocks, as are the other two, and she too ends up collecting a fair amount of attention from the dive bombers. Although the dive bombers only hit her with one bomb, but they plaster both of the destroyers that are adjacent to her with three bombs apiece. And the result is that one of them ends up, completely rolling over, basically
Casson.
leaning. That's Cass,
Yeah.
and yeah, leans over on top of Downs. Um, so yeah, that's kind of a hot mess. But again, from a target allocation standpoint, just not a good usage of these dive bomber attacks to be going after Pennsylvania. Okay, congratulations, you wrecked a couple of destroyers, but there were better things you could have done with that ordnance.
Yeah.
So,
So astern of Pennsylvania is USS Shaw, which is another destroyer. Of
mm-hmm.
course, the photography from when Shaw goes kaboom is incredible. She takes,
Spectacular.
oh
Yeah,
yeah, it's one of the most
yeah,
famous pictures of the war, frankly.
absolutely.
She takes two bombs, and her crew is forced to get out of Dodge immediately because the captain's like, this ain't gonna work. Everybody get off, because she's a fire. The fires eventually, most of her crew does get off before the fires reach her forward magazines, and then when the fire reaches her forward magazines, up she
Kaboom.
goes. And
Yep.
there's footage of that, and we examine that too. You see it in the background, just kabloof, she
Yeah.
goes up like her forward magazines went off.
And yet she's
And
not destroyed. I mean, she
no,
loses the forward part of the ship, but we rebuild her. There's an interesting quote in Wilmot's book that he
yes, I know what
talks
you're
about,
talking about.
some of these destroyers that any other navy would have just been like, off to the breakers for you, and we were just like, no, we're, we're, if need be, we'll just build entirely new ships around their machinery plants, but we're not losing these guys,
Yeah.
because sort of a mind over matter kind of affair.
I
Anyway,
think it was more of a middle finger to
I think that's probably right too. Nope, you didn't sink them.
yeah. You
So
thought you sunk it,
you
but you
thought you
did
sunk them, but
not.
you didn't. That's right.
So, like you put in the notes, they're not. These guys aren't the only ones that take a bump. Go ahead. You were going to say something.
No, no, no. I'm just go ahead.
I was going to say these guys aren't the only ones that take bombs here as well. It's California takes one,
Right.
Maryland takes one, West Virginia,
Yep.
which is, as you put in the notes, is already sunk. She
Yep.
takes bombs. Raleigh's hit by Abe.
Yep.
Tenders, Tangier and Curtis receive attention, and it's as you put in there, it's inappropriate because
It's
there are
completely
juicier
inappropriate.
targets. Yeah.
Oh my God, there are. And so here I'd like to pop up a little map that I did of the anchorage, and what you can see here is that at the 1010 Pier in the Navy Yard, which is right off the Southeast Lock, is a juicy cluster of four big American cruisers. You've got two of these, you know, big bruising light cruisers with, 15 6-inch guns. So, yeah, New Orleans, San Francisco, St. Louis, and Honolulu are all docked here, and they are tied up. Three of them are just basically lashed together. So those three, in and of themselves, comprise a target that is 600 feet long and 180 feet wide, and couldn't you
Damn,
could yeah.
you
There's
couldn't miss.
each of those ships is 61 feet 7 inches in breadth. So this is a big stationary target. And I just did a little digging last night just to kind of go through. All four of these ships are going to have extremely busy careers during the war. Between
Oh yeah.
them, they are going to collect 53 battle stars and a presidential unit citation going to the San Francisco for what she does at Guadalcanal. And, honestly, the Japanese could have wrecked all four of these ships had they not been, target fixated on Nevada, which was a totally inappropriate target, and instead gone after these guys. So, talk about a Homer Simpson bolt, kind of moment.
Yeah.
This really is it. Um, the net result of that is if you read Wilmot or Zim or Stilley as well, they're scathing in their critique of the dive bomber attack as a whole. Stilley calls it an almost complete debacle, with the battleships being the target of 44 dive bombers. That's more than half of the total group that shows up. The cruisers only, are the targets of 11, and another 23 of those dive bomber attacks were wasted on destroyers, auxiliaries, and unidentified targets. So, of that big quartet that we were talking about, only Honolulu collects a near miss that is going to do some damage to her. It's going to open in some of her seams and mess up sort of her electrical lines. But, you know, essentially that quartet gets off scot free. After the battle, Mitsuo Fuchida, who's the attack leader, is going to basically fabricate claims that he's going to present to the emperor that of those 78 dive bombers, 49 of them recorded hits, which is ludicrous. And when you actually go through the number of hits from that 70 aircraft, it is only 16. Five of them go into Nevada, three go into Casson and Shaw, three apiece. And then single bombs for California, Pennsylvania, Raleigh, Downs, and Curtis, which is about a 20% accuracy rate as opposed to the 62% accuracy rate that Fuchida claimed. And so, once again, the problem that you got here from the Japanese standpoint is that there's essentially a total lack of central command and control. Somebody needed to be telling these bombers where the heck your targets are. And one of the things that Stilley points out is that actually the orders were relatively conflicting. That the dive bombers were told, don't go after battleships, go after other ships unless they're moving, unless they're, well, if there's an aircraft carrier, everybody pound that thing, just
Sure.
blow it to hell and gone. But there were conflicting targeting orders here, and so it would have been difficult for these crews to just remember what the hell are we supposed to go after in the
Sure.
first place, and then you give them a big juicy target like Nevada that's actually moving, and suddenly all the animal instincts kick in, and they end up going after her. Yeah, it's a mess. So 14, I was wrong, not 18. 14 dive bombers are shot down over the anchorage. That's 18% of the total force attacking, and many others were damaged in the course of this thing. But yeah, there was a golden opportunity here for the Japanese to really put a licking on our cruiser force, and they did not take advantage of it.
So, of course, the question, and we've kind of danced around it, but the question is going to be asked, why? Why was there a lack of control, command and control? And I mean, because as we know, Fuchida's still farting
Yep.
around up there, watching everything go down, but he's not in control of the second wave. It's what's his name? Shimazaki
Yeah,
is in charge of the second wave,
the
but
overall, but really the guy in charge of the dive bombers is Agusa. I
Gusa,
mean, yeah, he's in overall command of that group of aircraft under the second wave, which is Shimazaki's bunch. So Igusa's got control over the dive bombers, but part of the problem here is, and I think Justin Pike would back me up on this. I don't think they got radio telephones in a Val. You got a
mhm.
radio telegraph, which means that how do
Dot
you
dot dot dot
exercise?
dash dash
Yeah,
dash. Yeah,
who the hell is going to decipher that in the middle of a dive bombing attack? That's not going to happen. Um, so there needed to have been either a reinforcement of orders before they got in their birds and took off, or I don't know what. But the bottom line is that yeah, there wasn't even a lot of follow the leader kind of stuff going on
yeah.
because the visibility conditions are so wretched.
And that's I think is the key. But yeah,
I think that's yeah. As I think about this, their dive bombers typically operated in Chutai of 9 aircraft, and you don't see that happening here, except with respect to Makino's attack on Nevada, where he comes in and he's actually bringing in organized groups of his Vals from Kaga, and they all go after Nevada. Other than that, the individual pilots were left picking out their targets, and in many cases, they picked out very inappropriate targets.
yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head. And that's what I was going to say is I think the visibility and the anti-aircraft fire, which added to the lack of visibility,
Yes,
contributed to this. Because if you're orbiting theoretically, and we know
right.
American dive bombers do this, not at Midway, they don't do this, but they sort of do this at Coral Sea, and we know they do this later in the war. They orbit and they organize and they say, okay, John, you
You,
take this one, Seth, you take this one, Tommy,
yep,
you take this one. And the Japanese would have done that, one would think, had they been able to see.
yeah,
And I think, when if you got cloud cover, the ceiling is at 4,000-ish feet.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
How do you do that, right?
yeah, how are
and
you
there
going to
and
do
there's a
that?
lot of smoke. And we do know too that a number of these aircraft aborted their runs because of the anti-aircraft fire, and either
Yeah,
dropped their bomb on something less appropriate, or in some cases came out of the dive and probably came around again. Although trying to regain altitude to do that all over, I'm guessing most of them didn't. Just drop your bomb and I'm out of here.
yeah.
So yeah, the bottom line is that from the American perspective, we look at this attack overall as being this sort of devastating blow, two separate attack waves, blah, 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 blah. But if you really sit down and analyze how it went for the Japanese, man, the second wave over the anchorage is really kind of a bust. Yeah.
To that end, ships are starting to get out.
Yep.
They are, as we know, Nevada doesn't. She beaches, but there are other ships in the harbor, obviously, that do heed the order to all ships sortie, and they're getting
Yep.
the hell out of there. USS Helm is one of them at 8:17. She's the first one out, as a matter of fact.
Hmm.
And we know St. Louis, and we'll talk about her in a second. Um, because there's pictures of that, and I think there's footage of that too, if I remember
Yeah, there
correctly
are.
from
Hmm.
what we're talking about. So Helm encounters a midget submarine. She opens fire, and we sort of kind of danced around the midget submarines because they don't
We're
do a
going to
whole
talk
hell of
about
a
that.
lot, but we're going to talk about
Yeah.
them here. Um, in the harbor, attempting to get out, as I also said was, or as I neglected to say, was USS Monahan.
Yep.
USS Monahan's a destroyer. She encountered a midget submarine as well. Unlike USS Helm, Monahan decided, and this is awesome. Again, destroyer skipper, different breed of cat.
Love
You know what? I'm not going to shoot this thing. I'm going to run this son of a bitch over.
it. Run it down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which, you see that in the Battle of the Atlantic on frequent occasions too. It's just like, nope, you're not
Yep.
getting away, sucker. Because, yeah,
Run
hello.
you down, Jackson.
Yeah,
So when Monahan was going to be a duty ship later on that afternoon, she gets word of Ward's
yep.
confrontation with the midget submarine outside, and she actually starts raising steam. Her captain's like, something might be amiss.
I'm
So
going to go
she's
out.
ready to roll,
Yeah,
immediately. As soon as the attack rolls off, she's like, she's ready to haul ass. Um, she moves out when she notices signal flags from USS Curtis stating that a submarine had
plain
been
tender.
sighted. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Um, this is directly from her battle report. It says lookouts on Monaghan spotted the periscope of what we know now to be I-22, or so they say, 1,200 yards off the starboard quarter as it was taken under fire by ships in the harbor. And this is true. Other ships saw the scope and started
Mhm.
popping at it. Suddenly, the conning tower and part of the submarine breached the surface, likely because it had fired one of its two torpedoes at the
Yep.
Curtis.
Yep.
Freed of the huge weight, the partially surfaced submarine became a magnet for 5-inch shells. Yes, it did.
Hmm.
Monahan's torpedo officer, Ensign P.W. Gill, recalled, and I quote, "It was fully expected that we would be damaged forward with good possibility of losing the forecastle if the submarine hit was solid." So they already knew they were going to run this sucker down. The
Right.
repair the repair party was hastily organized to isolate the damage prior to them hitting this damn submarine. Gun number two fired two shots, and gun number one had a hang fire, which means they just had a shell in there and it wouldn't go off and they couldn't eject it. As we passed over the submarine, only a slight jar was felt forward. I was with repair party at gun number one. Two men were sent below to sound peak tanks and investigate damage. None was found. I went to the forecastle and stood on by to drop anchor in an attempt to snub ship and help keep it off the mudbank because, as we said, Monahan's moving fast
Yep.
and there are no brakes on a destroyer. You can't just hit the brakes and stop. You're going to have to do some pretty drastic action so you don't run into other ships or run this sucker aground.
Right.
The captain waved that he did not want anchor dropped. At this time, our bow struck a mudbank and starboard glanced off a crane barge. Two explosions were heard aft, and a large amount of what appeared to be oil came up with depth charge splashes. Men aft on Curtis were observed to be cheering frantically.
That's how we roll. So yeah, to this issue of the mini subs, and there's been a persistent myth, I would say, that one or more of these submarines got into the anchorage. So far as we know, only one made it into the anchorage. And this was probably, and this particular sub that we just got done talking about is probably the mini sub of Lieutenant Iwasa, who was the most experienced of the mini sub pilots. He was one of the guys who was agitating, with Yamamoto, please take my unit along to do this very misguided attack. Because funniest thing, gee, as soon as this submarine actually got into the harbor, a whole bunch of people did see it. Imagine what would have happened if it had gotten in there even earlier. Um, but the bottom line is, you got five of these subs, and I do not find it credible to think that any others got in except Iwasa's sub. So there's been a consistent myth that is based on a picture that was taken out of the back seat of one of these Kate torpedo planes during the first attack wave. And this backseater took a shot, and if you look down in the water, actually very close to Pier 1010, where all this group of cruisers that we were just talking about is moored, you can see what looks like, there could be some sort of an anomaly in the water. And my late friend Burl Burlingham, God rest his soul, was a huge proponent of the fact that no, that is a mini sub that snuck in and took pot shots at Battleship Row. And with all due respect to Burl, I just do not buy it. And the reason I don't buy it is because you can account for all 10 of the torpedoes of these five midget submarines. Anyway, and we'll do that accounting actually after we get done with this next action, which is Cruiser St. Louis.
Well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about
Yeah.
St. Louis.
So
She's
St.
the
St.
biggest
Louis,
ship to get out at this point, or try to
yeah,
get out.
she right. And so St. Louis is one of this quartet of cruisers that would have been a good target for the dive bombers. But during the middle of this attack, she starts backing out of there, and she too ends up going down the channel. And as she's in the process of doing that, she ends up coming under torpedo attack. And it had to have been from one of these mini subs, because none of the big Japanese mother subs were anywhere near this neck of the woods at this point. They had launched their midget submarines and then pulled off. They were well away from the harbor. It was the midget subs that were coming in at this point. So if St. Louis comes under torpedo attack, it has to be from one of these midget subs. And there are dozens of eyewitnesses who said they saw two separate torpedo wakes coming in on the starboard side of St. Louis, one after the other. And both of these torpedoes end up impacting against a shoal short of the target, which drenches St. Louis with seawater. When the submarine fires, she too briefly broaches because the buoyancy control on these little subs was just garbage, frankly.
Mhm.
And when you get rid of a large weight like a torpedo, lo and behold, you lose control of the sub and the sub breaches. St. Louis fired her 5-inch guns at this target, didn't hit anything, didn't really know what they were shooting at. But after the battle, they showed the captain of St. Louis an identification picture of one of these subs. He's like, "Oh yeah, that's absolutely what we were going after at that point." So St. Louis is sort of I guess the knot in the bow then, or the kind of disproves this whole theory of another sub having gotten into the anchorage because okay, we know about Ensign Sakamaki's submarine. He was
Mhm.
POW number one. His
Right.
sub is going to end up drifting past Diamond Head and is going to wash up near Bellows Field. So, and when that sub was captured, both torpedoes were in it. Um, the Midget sub, probably launched by I-18, was found in 1960, also with both torpedoes aboard. The Ward submarine, of course, which was fired on
Right.
by Ward and sunk by Ward, when we finally find that submarine in 2002, it also had both torpedoes aboard. We know about um, the submarine from Monaghan. That is Lieutenant Iwasa's submarine, and he fired both of his torpedoes, one at the Curtis and one at the Monaghan, and then is destroyed for his trouble. And then this final one, if you believe the eyewitness accounts that St. Louis was fired upon, that then is 10 torpedoes accounted for. So there was no mythical um, submarine that made it in opposite Battleship Row. And honestly, given the amount of heat that Iwasa's midget drew, a lot of different people saw that sub, and he was the most experienced of those midget sub drivers. So to believe that some other mythical submarine actually got all the way opposite uh, Battleship Row and was never seen by anybody, fired two torpedoes and was never seen by anybody, and then disappeared somehow. No, don't buy it.
Yeah.
So anyway,
So to put a little more of a blanket on the myth of Oklahoma being hit by a midget sub too, people are going to say that damage analysis on the torpedo hits that were on Oklahoma, there were several that were bigger than the others, like that there was bigger kaboom.
yeah,
And I think that can be easily explained. And we've talked about this. She took, a friggin' half a dozen or more
yeah,
torpedoes, and several of them hit the same spot or very, very close to the same spot within,
right,
a couple dozen feet of the
yep,
same spot. And I mean, it's just like anything else, you hit the same spot twice with something really hard, it's going to make the bobo a lot bigger each time.
yeah,
It's going to make the ouchie a little bit more. And that's essentially what happens here. Kind of the similar thing happens to USS Juno. She takes out
yeah,
one torpedo, and then the second torpedo the following day hits literally the same damn spot, and then up she
yeah.
goes. But there's no different to Oklahoma. I think the bigger torpedo wounds in Oklahoma are just because she got hit in the same spot a couple times
Times.
by the same type of
Yeah,
weapon.
yeah. And once again, she is the ship that is, center line right down the
Yes,
alleyway in the southeast lock. And so, yeah, that probability distribution, it's the funniest thing that the ship
right.
in the middle of that would collect a lot of those fish, and that's Oklahoma. Yeah.
Indeed. All right, so for all intents and purposes, we've gone through just about everything that happens in the anchorage. And yes, there's other
Yep.
stories, but we're not going to cover them all. But the airfields are also attacked in this second wave. Specifically, Kaneohe is hit pretty
Yep.
hard. But John, take us through the airfield attacks here.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Wheeler really doesn't get hit again because they just bound to
Yeah,
that place during the first attack wave. Um, Ford Island gets attacked. It's a fiasco. Most of the bombs get dropped early again because the Japanese can't see real well what they're trying to do. And these air groups from Shokaku and Zuikaku are not as proficient as some of the other air groups were. And so a bunch of these planes drop their bombs early. They end up hitting the Waipo Peninsula. Only one bomb actually hits Ford Island. The Hickam attack likewise suffers from poor visibility. The Japanese aborted their initial attack and came around again and decided to break up their initial formation from the sort of V of V's kind of thing. They were like, this is ridiculous. We're going to end up dumping a bunch of our bombs from the outboard planes are going to go into places that don't make any sense. So they abort their attack. They come back around in a more of a column formation and end up the first Chutai ends up dropping its bombs and hits the Hawaiian Air Depot's hangars. Second and third Chutai abort a second time and come back around again for a third
Damn.
attack. And they end up hitting a couple of hangars as well as the Air Corps barracks, which ends up inflicting pretty heavy American casualties as a result of that. Their strafing attacks come in from 18 Zeros, but again, there's a lot of smoke from the earlier bomb hits. So the Zeros don't have very good visibility. And so, all in all, the American aircraft losses are lighter than you would think. So, by the end of the day, the Americans will have about 24 flyable aircraft, another 16 that are going to be deemed at least repairable, and there were only 13 aircraft that were considered total losses at Hickam. Meanwhile, Kaneohe comes under pretty severe attack during the second wave. 9 high-level Kates come in from Shokaku under the command of Lieutenant Ichihara Tatsuo. And again, because smoke from the initial attacks, there's a burning PBY out on the apron and cloud cover as well. They end up boarding the first attack. They come around for a second series of runs, and they're only dropping half of their bombs each time because they don't want to, completely screw up
Mhm.
and lose all of their ordnance if it's a bad attack. Anyway, the bottom line is that at the tail end of this attack, they do plaster hangar number 1 and the environs with a total of 9 250-kilogram bombs. This ends up destroying pretty much what's left of the PBYs from the 2 Pat wings that are based there. And then there's also a very heavy strafing that comes in under, we've mentioned this guy, Soryu's Aida Fusada. And of all the planes in that strafing attack, he makes multiple runs and discovers that, making multiple runs in a fairly heavily defended airstrip, even if it's, being defended with rifles and 30 cals and what have you, can be dangerous to your health. And indeed it is, as they shoot Aida down, and he ends up landing in the middle of the base, and he's going to be the only Japanese fatality from that attack. But by the end of this attack, there are only 3 flyable PBYs left at Kaneohe.
And the guy we didn't mention last time because he's kind of like Taylor and Welch's attack. His action stretch between the first and the second wave is our friend John Finn. John Finn, of course, is he was an old salt by the time of Pearl Harbor. He
Yeah,
enlisted in the Navy in 1928. So by Pearl Harbor, he'd been around a while. He was a
yeah,
chief. He lived there at Kaneohe or very near Kaneohe in one of the chief
had
petty
a
officers'
bungalow.
bungalows. Yeah.
Yeah,
And when the attack goes down, he runs out the house in his drawers, grabbing his pants behind him and gets in his vehicle. He had a motorcycle. I don't remember if it was his bike or his car, but it doesn't matter. He flies down to the to post
yeah,
and gets out and famously mans a water-cooled, huge 50 caliber machine gun that's essentially it's not in the middle of the open, but it's he doesn't have a whole hell of a lot of cover.
yeah. I've seen where he was, and yeah,
Yeah.
there's not a lot of cover. You're kind of
Uh,
out there.
and he
And there
didn't
were
care.
Japanese aircraft all over the place. So yeah,
Yeah.
he was in danger for
He
sure.
was
And
certainly in danger, and he's wounded
yeah,
several
multiple
times,
times.
in the legs and the feet. I think he takes one through the shoulder, I think.
Yep,
And he was a tough old bird. I knew him. I didn't know him exceedingly well, but I did know him, and he was the epitome of old salt. And I mean, he just stands there and shrugs it off and just keeps rocking and rolling on that 50 caliber. And
yeah,
they say he shot down planes, but again, it's like, Dory Miller, who the hell knows? It doesn't
right.
matter. The man exhibited incredible courage
Yep,
and, just sheer guts by doing what he did, and he also is awarded the blue ribbon.
Yep.
Um, so after these air attacks, as you said, there's only three flyable PBYs left on the island,
Yeah.
or at least at Kaneohe anyway.
At Kaneohe. Yeah.
Um, Oahu had, of course, it was like, why didn't we fight back? Because there wasn't much left to fight back with.
Yeah. I mean,
This
they had
attack,
done.
especially the first, just
Yeah.
blew the hell out of
I
everything.
forget the exact number of aircraft that we lost between these two. Well, you actually have it here. Yeah,
Yeah, I got it here. Yeah.
it's like 180 some aircraft have been completely, destroyed, or and then another 120 some are damaged to one extent. I mean, for all
It's
intents
nuts.
and purposes, the Japanese exterminated American air power on Oahu that morning.
To
So,
to to put exact numbers on everything, the
yeah,
Navy and Marines lost 13 VFs, fighters of various kinds, 21 dive bombers, 46
patrol.
patrol aircraft, two transports, and five other aircraft. The Army lost four B-17s, 12 B-18s, two A-20s, 32 P-40s, 20 P-36s, four P-26s, and three other aircraft of various kinds. 97 Navy and Marine Corps aircraft were destroyed, and a further 77 Army Air Corps aircraft were destroyed. 121 Army aircraft were damaged, with 24 never to see the air again. And those numbers come from Wilmot. The
Mhm.
Navy retained a grand total of seven PBYs on the entire island, three of which we know were at Kaneohe, and 10 SBDs that were flyable, while the Army had four B-17s, 11 B-18s, and 75 fighters of
Various mix, yeah,
various mix to
40s
fly.
and
Most of them were
36s.
P-36s, but I don't have the exact number on that. So
Right.
that's not a lot to go back
No.
and A, find Kido Butai if you can, which of course we can't, and B, strike them. We do send out searches at 1127, um, uh,
A lot of them going
2B17. Go ahead.
they go in the wrong directions.
They do.
Uh,
They do.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're looking for the Japanese to the south of the island and not to the north in a lot of cases. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Four A-20 Havocs are sent out searching, and two B-17s are sent out searching. The B-17s are going to the south, and they don't find jack
tiddly
squat.
poo. Yep.
Not a damn thing. The only forces I put in the notes that could have done something was about ish 250 miles west of Pearl Harbor. And of course, people are saying, "Why didn't you talk about Enterprise?" Well, here you go.
We go.
This is the attack force that was under the command of William F. Halsey, centered around USS Enterprise CV-6. Um, they were steaming to Pearl. They should have theoretically been in Pearl during the attack,
Yeah,
but
got
there's
lucky there.
multiple big time multiple things that cause her delay, not the least of which is one of her cruisers gets a line wrapped around one of her props and cause they have to slow down, and the weather is terrible, and she's trying to fuel her destroyers, and that slows them down. All
Yep.
this is, merciful, thank God. But she obviously doesn't get into Pearl. And of course her morning flight, and we said this before, as carriers are coming into Pearl Harbor, more often than not, they would launch their aircraft and have them land at either Kaneohe or Ford Island.
Right.
Enterprise's people are going to go to Ford Island that morning, and she's actually conducting a morning search. And this is before the Japanese attack, and of course her SBDs. Um, let's see, I had the number here. She launches 18 SBDs that morning. 13 are from Scouting 6 and four from VB6 plus CAG.
Mhm.
They launch their morning search towards Ford Island. These guys arrive in pairs over Oahu. Let's say searched in pairs. They arrive in pairs, and they're, most of them, not all of them, but most of them are attacked by Japanese aircraft or friendly fire. Seven are shot down in the morning, with eight men killed in action and another two wounded. I think four of those seven are shot down by Japanese aircraft, if I
Yeah,
remember
I think that's
correctly.
right.
Hmm.
Yeah, but yeah, there are definitely some friendly fire fatalities as a result of this, and you can understand why. I mean, we're not executing terribly good fire discipline
No.
at this point because it's been a very bad morning at the office, and anything that's in the air, we're going to be blazing away at. So,
And they do, and they do, and they do it
yep,
multiple times, because that afternoon, Enterprise is obviously not going into port. She's
yes,
her task group is out there doing task group
doing
things.
carrier things. Yeah,
Yeah, and they're out there hunting for the Japanese as well. And we talked about this before. She launches a strike, Enterprise does, the first offensive strike of World War II from the United States Navy off of an aircraft carrier. She launches a strike of six F-4Fs, 18 TBDs, and six dive bombers, six SBDs. The SBDs are armed with smoke pots, and they are there to generate a smoke screen for the
screen
TBDs to
for the
come in and
torpedo
fly.
planes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Obviously, they don't find anything, which is, as I put in the notes, thank God, because all those guys probably, well, most of those guys probably would have been shot down and killed.
yeah,
Um, the fighters wind up diverting to Pearl Harbor, unfortunately, where three of them are shot down at dusk by friendly fire, with
yep,
all three of those fighter pilots being killed.
yep.
So, wasn't a good day for Enterprise either.
No, not at all. So that then takes us to Kita. What's happening, as they now begin recovering the aircraft first of the first attack wave and then the second attack wave. And of course, there's this ongoing, never-ending, pernicious myth about, why didn't the Japanese attack the fuel tanks at
Yes.
Pearl Harbor? And that myth is courtesy of none other than Mitsuo Fuchida. And it's been cemented in the popular imagination. I can send you some screen caps, Seth, if you want these.
Sure.
Tora, Tora, Tora.
Oh,
So
yeah.
famously in this sequence, we see Fuchida's Kate land on the Akagi. He gets out of the plane. He's talking to his crew chief. Why the hell isn't the third attack wave getting ready to go? And the crew chief is like, yeah, we haven't got any orders. And Fuchida looks up at the bridge of Akagi, and his buddy Genda is on the bridge and looks down, and they sort of have this, subliminal mental communication. And at that point, Genda in the movie goes over and starts arguing with Admiral Nagumo and says, we got to go back, we got to hit the Americans again. And Nagumo rather rudely in Japanese says, Chigo, which means literally it means it's different, but in reality it means no, you're wrong. Um, Nagumo is like, we're just at the very beginning of this war. The preservation of this force is incredibly important. We don't know where the American carriers are, and we out. And at that point, the Z flag, literally in those words, we out. The Z flag, or the ensigns get rung up the mast that the force is to retire, and Fuchida is left down on the deck, a very grumpy customer. No, this cannot be. None of that happened. That's all baloney. It's all fictitious baloney in a movie. But the kernel of that comes from Fuchida's account that he gives to Gordon Prang in 1963 when Prang is writing Tora Tora Tora. And then Fuchida ends up being a technical consultant on the movie as well. And lo and behold, this myth gets injected into the movie and is therefore seen by millions of Americans and gets cemented in our popular imagination. Really, what ends up going down is a big fat nothing because um, well, first of all, this argument that was supposedly happened on the bridge never took place. And in fact, we have a first person account from none other than Minoru Genda, who says, I was on the bridge the whole time, and no such suggestion was ever made by Fuchida. And there was never an argument between me and Admiral Nagumo because I knew that Nagumo wasn't going to be up for a second attack. And it's intriguing because if you actually read Fuchida's account that was given right after the war in October of 1945, when we occupied Japan, the United States Strategic Bombing Survey goes and interviews a whole bunch of Japanese officers. And one of them that they interview is Fuchida. And they ask him point blank in that interview, why didn't you go back and hit our fuel tanks again? And Fuchida's answer in 1945 is, well, we had sunk four American battleships. We knew that fulfilled the mission objectives. We didn't know where your carriers were. We didn't know how much damage we had actually done to the aircraft on Oahu. So given those sort of unknowns, we were like, we're going home at this point. Fast forward, of course, to 1963, and his account has completely morphed. And I think it's actually because of what he heard that day in 1945 with the US Bus interviewers, that we, the Americans, thought it was really stupid that the Japanese hadn't gone back and hit us. That put the colonel in Fuchida's head. And he was a very bright, charismatic guy, a good storyteller. He knew how to tell a good war story, and he wasn't going to let the facts get in the way. Um, you know, and so Fujita's like, well, why did the Americans think that this was stupid? And, lo and behold, in 1963, he gives this account, which makes himself out to be much more prescient, and insightful. It's like, oh, if they had just listened to me, we would have done much better in the war. But here's the deal from just a doctrinal standpoint, the Japanese Navy is ultra Mahanian in its outlook. If you're not sinking warships, you're not doing meaningful stuff.
Right.
And so if you look at the targeting orders that were handed down from Yamamoto's planners to combined fleet and specifically to First Air Fleet, they're contained in Operations Order number 1. And Annex number 3 to that order says the following, that the targets on Oahu that are to be attacked are the following: airfields, number 1, aircraft carriers, number 2, battleships, cruisers, and other warships, merchant shipping, port facilities, land installations. So what Fuchida is asking you to do is to make this that buy into the fact that he had this mental epiphany that instead of continuing to go through the targeting list in order, we should just jump to the bottom of the targeting list, and that's going to somehow win the war for us, right?
Right.
It's nonsense. And it would have marked a complete renunciation of 15 years worth of naval training and indoctrination on the part of Fuchida for him to, be making this crazy suggestion that, yeah, we should just go after a bunch of fuel tanks. The other thing that's going on here is that just from a, a targeting standpoint and a mission creation standpoint, how are the Japanese going to put together off the top of their heads a new attack plan for some sort
Right.
of an afternoon attack? There was no contingency plan in hand, because Genda had tried talking to both Nagumo and his chief of staff, a guy named Kusaka, on the way out. What do you think? Could we do another follow-up attack? And both Nagumo and Kusaka were again that from the beginning, which meant that there was no contingency plan in hand. So now here I am, let's just imagine that Nagumo is like, you're right, let's go back and hit these guys again. Well, Genda's got to come up with a new attack plan on the fly. We've got to
Mhm.
somehow assess from all 6 of these carriers, how many birds do you actually have that are in working
Right.
order here? How many of your crewmen are unwounded? Got to get that all assessed, got to put together some sort of an attack plan, got to lay out all the targeting priorities. These air groups are not going to be as coordinated as they were this morning, that's for sure. Um, and the other problem is that even if you made this intentional decision to go after the fuel tanks at Pearl, these are very hard targets to hit. You can't just
Yes.
strafe them. The metal on these tanks is sufficient that a 7.7 millimeter bullet will not go through. A 20 millimeter cannon round might, but fuel oil is not in and of itself terribly flammable. So if you're really serious about knocking out our fuel tanks here, you got to go after them with bombs, which means that you got to hit them with dive bombers, really. There's only about 60 of those left operable, I think, in the fleet. The other problems you've got is, one, the fuel state of the destroyers in the Japanese task force is already edging down because destroyers are fuel hogs. And so it might have been the case that they might not have had enough fuel to even do this if they had wanted to, that they would have had to retire, re-oil, come back down.
Yeah. Never going to
That's
happen.
never going to happen. And the real kicker is that both Zim and Stilley do an analysis of this, Wilmot too, as a matter of fact, that really the earliest you would have been able to get this attack force put together and up and in the air is probably by 1500 hours. Sunset is at 1712,
1712.
and nautical twilight is 1805. It's 3 hours there and back, to get to Oahu. And if you're going to be doing these attacks, this is a 4 hour mission, right? Now you got to be landing all of these planes after dark. A lot of them are going to be damaged too. No way. This just
Yeah.
isn't going to happen. It is not consistent with Japanese doctrine. It is not consistent with a raiding force that has the limited ability to project power. We've only got a limited time window here. And the final thing I would point out is just the fact that Pearl Harbor at its core is an attack against American morale, right?
Mhm.
If you're serious that you're going to really deflate our morale, um, it's credible that you might think that sinking our battleships or maybe our carriers might be a blow to that morale. But America is the world's largest petroleum exporter at
Yeah.
this point in time. You tell me that you blow up a bunch of our fuel tanks and the American people are going to be like, "Oh my God, we've lost our gasoline. We still have Texas. You know, we we got more oil than we know what to do with." So just the whole notion that somehow an attack against the fuel tanks on December 7th was going to somehow materially change the trajectory of the Pacific War, in my humble estimation, is just ludicrous. So there you have it.
I think at best, if they had done it, first of all, the casualties would have been exorbitant because
Yeah, buddy.
the second wave casualties compared to the first wave casualties are
We're already bad.
significantly higher. So
Mm,
yeah, let's do this a third time because that's smart, number one. Number two, if they do take out those oil tanks or even just take out a few of them, as you said, it's not going to do a lick. It's not
yeah,
going to do anything because we're just going to bring more crap over from the West Coast and we're going to bring it over there. And frankly, to the Japanese point too, they knew they had inflicted tremendous damage on our fleet. What is the oil
yes,
going to do to the ships that are already sitting on the bottom of the harbor?
yeah,
Nothing. Not
yeah,
not a damn thing. So, it's foolishness. And to think too that you could come up with a plan, as you were saying, on the fly and
yes,
launch and, plan it and arm it and brief everybody in the appropriate amount of time to actually get it done is asinine because even in 1943, 44, and 45, the U.S. Navy, as big as and powerful as it was, could not do that effectively.
yeah, yeah,
Look at some of the operations we talked about. Hailstone truck, that was planned 3, 4, 5 days before, and we knew it was
yes,
only going to be two hits, boom, boom, or in the morning, and then later on that morning. And
yeah,
even though we could have gone in there and wreaked more havoc, there wasn't the plan to do it, and we
yeah,
had to get the hell out of Dodge. So I mean, the biggest, most powerful navy in the world in 44 couldn't do it. The biggest, most powerful navy in the world in 41 couldn't do it either. So
yeah.
it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and I think we mentioned this too in the first wave episode that again, if the Japanese have been serious about impeding our logistics, the biggest juiciest target in that harbor was Neosho,
Mhm.
and she was attacked by the dive bombers. There was one dive bomber that went after her in that attack, but that's the sum total of it. And so, um, I want to be careful here and say that it's not like the fuel situation for the U.S. Navy at the beginning part of this war was super great. And again, Sal Mercogliano can talk to us all day about the fact that we did not have nearly enough oilers in this theater, and if you
Mhm.
lost an oiler, you could really throw spanners in the works. But you know, big picture, I just don't see attacking those fuel tanks as being a meaningful contributor to some mythical better Japanese
Yeah.
strategy that's going to lead to a better outcome in this war. It ain't there. So
At best, it might have delayed some
right,
patrolling action outside of Pearl Harbor, which of course we do immediately.
maybe some of these carrier raids would not have been as
Right.
significant as they were in the
Or not
Marshalls or
as
whatever.
early, not as
Right.
early, but even then,
Yeah.
hell, we got Oilers with us when we go do that. So I mean, it's
Right.
anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get to
Japanese
the
losses.
final assessment. Yeah, Japanese losses. They come off relatively light, all things considered.
Yeah, they do. So they lose all five of their mini subs with nine KIA and one POW. Ensign Sakamaki is POW numero uno. They lose 29 aircraft, including nine Zeros, 15 Vals, and five Kates. Two further Kates ditched, and 15 aircraft that made it back to the fleet were subsequently shoved over the side as being too heavily damaged to repair. So that's 46 total losses. That's about 13% of the attacking force. And another 111 aircraft were damaged. It's unclear as to whether or not those 15 jettisoned ones are included in that 111 or not. You got 45 dead aviators. And 3 days later, the one of these mother subs, the I-70, was sunk off of Hawaii as well. So, you can sort of throw that into the mix. The American losses obviously are much, much worse. In addition to the aircraft that we just talked about, we've lost 2,403 killed in action, missing in action, or later died of wounds, and another 1,178 men are wounded. There's also a number of civilians that are killed in
Yes.
this attack, unfortunately, mostly by friendly fire
Yes.
of American shells coming back down and landing in inconvenient places around Honolulu and places like that. I forget the exact numbers.
It's in the
Um,
40s. I want to say it's like
it's
40
pretty
or
it's damn
46.
large. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
more than you would think. And it is a real tragedy. So anyway,
It is, and most of it is American friendly fire.
yep,
There's, as we said before, what goes up must come down. And if you see the pictures which we've shown throughout this episode of the AAA over the Anchorage specifically,
yeah,
it's a lot of stuff. It's a
yeah.
lot of metal coming down. Um, the
Four battleships.
Japanese. Oh,
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was
Go
just
ahead.
going to say, yeah, four battleships sunk, one beached, and three lightly damaged. Those are the
The
main
heavy numbers. Yeah.
casualties.
Yeah.
Utah, of course, is sunk as well. Oglala as well, and there's damage to numerous other combatants. But it really is the battle line that takes it on the chin here.
Which, and we could get into discussion, but now isn't the time that is actually, I hate to say it, but it's almost fortuitous because it forces the U.S. Navy into the modern era.
Yeah,
We have to use submarines and aircraft carriers because we ain't got no battle wagons no more. So,
yeah.
or at least not enough to do the job.
Hmm.
Um, so while we got a little bit of time, let just briefly, Japanese response to the attack. I mean, they think,
Ecstatic,
yeah,
ecstatic. Um, and and some of that has to be filtered through the lens of just growing Japanese public grievances against America in general. I mean, they certainly were aware of the unfair immigration practices that had been, in place out in places like California. And so that there really was this sort of growing urge to hit back against the Americans. And as a result of an attack as spectacular as this one, you can imagine that there's this general sense of euphoria within the Japanese public, which of course is going to be tempered the longer this war goes on. I think there were certain more perceptive observers who were kind of like, okay, we're already at war with the Chinese, and now we are at war with the Americans, the British, and the Dutch. Because understand too that word of the attack against Pearl Harbor is also coming in at the same time with
mhm.
the campaign against Hong Kong is being launched. The Japanese are successfully invading in Malaya. There's actions in the Philippines. I mean, their initial opening blows just are all across the Western Pacific, in addition to Hawaii. And there's a lot of very upbeat war news coming back as a result of all of those attacks. But I think arguably Pearl Harbor really is sort of the crown jewel in that news, and it really is. It's a truly spectacular attack, and by all outward appearances is really really successful.
It is successful. There's no
Yeah,
question.
no
You
question
know,
of it.
we talked about it, and we can maybe do an episode on it. But briefly, the American response. There, the American public was very, we don't really want to get into a war, blah 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 blah, and the isolationist and all this jazz. This completely eliminates that.
Yeah,
That is gone. There is no more isolationism. There is no more, let Europe fight its own war. The United States briefly, and again, we'll talk about this when we get to the home front, and many, 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 many weeks from now, is that briefly the United States is home front is galvanized in this effort. For the certainly the first, I'd
furious.
say, yeah, 6 months, but the first 6 weeks after the
Yes.
attack on Pearl Harbor, everybody wants Japanese blood. Everybody does, and any thought about not getting into the war is completely gone from
Yeah.
American public opinion in you know, that like that. When the news
Yep.
starts trickling in over the radio on that Sunday, it's it. It's over with. And you see this tremendous shift in American public opinion. And the stories are that the morning after, the lines were around the block for enlistment stations, and to a
Some
point
of that
that's
is
true.
that is
But
true. There were a number of stations in New York City that had to stay open all night to handle
yeah,
the influx of recruits that were coming in. And so, um, yeah, I think there's this mixture of surprise and extreme outrage.
oh yeah,
My
utter
daughter,
fury.
yeah, my daughter, she does a number of sort of funny World War II imitations, and her take on this is like, "Girl, you did not just bomb Pearl Harbor. Hold my hoot." It's just that's the that's the kind of attitude at this point,
Yeah.
incredulousness and outrage, and like, "Oh, you are messing with the wrong people here." Which is intriguing because when you think about the entire Japanese strategy for this war, it is to
Mhm.
somehow shock and cow the Americans into being willing to come to the negotiating table.
Not
It
today.
is not today. Um, as we'll hear in FDR's address to Congress, even now, he is already laying out terms for the end of this war that are absolutely uncompromising. The American people, in their righteous might, will win through to absolute victory. There is not going to be a negotiated settlement to this war.
No.
We are going to dictate the terms and we are going to crush you. So, you know, you can sort of fast forward to Casablanca, that conference in 1943, where we actually do articulate, unconditional surrender, but that is very clearly presaged in the address that FDR gives to the country on December 8th.
Yeah.
That we are going to be the ones who end this war, and it's going to be on our terms.
Mhm.
So, anyway,
Yep. And I think that would be after I give our wrap up that I gotta play FDR's infamy speech
it's
because it's
it's the most
still
brilliant 7.5 minutes worth of speech making in American hit. Well, okay, the Gettysburg Address is certainly up there too,
right.
but yeah,
Right. There's no
yeah,
recording of that though.
no recording of that. But yeah, every time I listen to FDR's speech, it does give me chills.
Absolutely.
He pulls no punches, and he lays out for the American people very clearly what has happened here, but also lays out very clearly that no, there's not going to be a negotiated settlement with the Japanese. We are going to beat these suckers, and yeah, that's it.
I'm gonna beat you to a bloody pulp and you're gonna
Yep,
take it all day long. It is definitely one of the most stirring speeches of his entire political career, and
for sure.
it
It's
galvanizes the
masterful.
country. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
the country was already ready to rock and roll after the news came through that morning, but the
yeah,
following day, when everybody is glued to their radio and hears that speech, that's it.
yep,
There's no turning back at that point. And I think we should do an episode on the American home. We'll do the home front, but the American home front
yeah.
immediately after Pearl Harbor because there's so much
Stuff going on
stuff
there.
that
Yeah,
goes on. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. I think a lot of people don't understand all that. So, but we'll get to that later. All
yep,
right, before we do wrap it up, and before I play that speech, I just want to reiterate one more time: Q&A. Send your questions from September the 9th, the day this episode airs, until September the 26th, which is a Friday, I believe, to unauthorized Pacific podcast at gmail.com. And please put in the subject title Q&A from, John or whatever the heck you want to
yeah,
do. And again, put where you're from so we'll know where the hell you're from so we can say, hey, John from
yeah.
Minnesota says you guys suck,
Right, exactly.
whatever. So, all right. So I'm going to wrap it up and then we're going to play FDR. So with that, we want to thank you very much for listening in on our conversation. Please subscribe to the channel and all that jazz. We'd appreciate it. If you do, give us a rating and review. If you have a question, obviously you know where to send it. Please do so. If you want to see the video version of this, please look at our YouTube channel. If you're already not doing that, once again, my name is Seth Paridon. I want to thank you very, very much for listening and or watching. John, my good friend, thanks for being here as always.
Thank you so much to everyone who tunes into these things every week. We really appreciate it. And yeah, I'm John Parshall, and we will see you again next week.
Senators and representatives, I have the distinguished honor of presenting the President of the United States.
President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate and of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan, was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. Indeed, 1 hour after Japanese air squadrons had commenced bombing in the American island of Oahu, the Japanese ambassador to the United States and his colleague delivered to our Secretary of State a formal reply to a recent American message. And while this reply stated that it seemed useless to continue the existing diplomatic negotiations, it contained no threat or hint of war or of armed attack. It will be recorded that the distance of Hawaii from Japan makes it obvious that the attack was deliberately planned many days or even weeks ago. During the intervening time, the Japanese government has deliberately sought to deceive the United States by false statements and expressions of hope for continued peace. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. In addition, American ships have been reported torpedoed on the high seas between San Francisco and Honolulu. Yesterday, the Japanese government also launched an attack against Malaya. Last night, Japanese forces attacked Hong Kong. Last night, Japanese forces attacked Guam. Last night, Japanese forces attacked the Philippine Islands. Last night, the Japanese attacked Wake Island. And this morning, the Japanese attacked Midway Island. Japan has therefore undertaken a surprise offensive extending throughout the Pacific area. The facts of yesterday and today speak for themselves. The people of the United States have already formed their opinions and well understand the implications to the very life and safety of our nation. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense, but always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory. I believe that I interpret the will of the Congress and of the people when I assert that we will not only defend ourselves to the uttermost, but will make it very certain that this form of treachery shall never again endanger us. Hostilities exist. There is no blinking at the fact that our people, our territory, and our interests are in grave danger. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God. I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.